This story is based on true events. The names of characters and cities have been changed for confidentiality purposes. The Jones family lived on the outskirts of Reno, Nevada, in a sprawling house that stood like an oasis against the barren desert backdrop. The family of five was known throughout their community for their warmth and generosity. Marcus Jones, a retired Navy officer turned mechanic, was the kind of man who'd fix a stranger's car for free if they couldn't afford it. His wife, Lila, worked tirelessly as a nurse, often pulling long shifts at the local hospital, but still managing to keep her home immaculate. Together, they had built a life of stability and love for their three children, 16-year-old twins Malik and Maya, and their youngest, 8-year-old Isaiah. It was Lila's idea to adopt Emily. She'd met the girl during a volunteer shift at a group home for troubled teens. Emily was pale and waifish, with ash blonde hair that hung limply over her face and dark eyes that seemed too old for her years. She rarely spoke, retreating into herself like a shadow in the corner of the room. Something about her tugged at Lila's heart, perhaps the way she flinched when anyone raised their voice, or the haunted look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. Emily had been bounced between foster homes since she was 6, each family relinquishing her after claiming she was too difficult. Lila was determined to be different. She convinced Marcus that they could offer Emily a fresh start, a chance to heal in a loving home. The twins were skeptical, especially Malik, who didn't like the idea of sharing their space with a stranger. But Lila's conviction won out. Within weeks, Emily became a part of the Jones family. When Emily arrived, she clutched a battered suitcase and wore a threadbare hoodie that swallowed her small frame. Her eyes darted nervously around the house, as if she were waiting for something to go wrong. Lila greeted her with open arms, ushering her inside with a warmth that felt almost overwhelming. The children were less enthusiastic. Maya offered a polite smile and quickly retreated to her room, while Malik gave Emily a single glance before disappearing to the garage with his headphones on. Isaiah, curious and unfiltered, asked Emily if she was scared of the dark. She didn't answer, her expression blank as her fingers tightened on the strap of her bag. From the start, strange things began to happen in the Jones household. On Emily's first night, Maya woke up screaming, claiming she'd seen someone standing at the foot of her bed. Marcus searched the house but found no sign of an intruder. They chalked it up to a nightmare, but the air in the house felt heavier the next day, as though something unseen had settled into its corners. Emily quickly fell into an eerie rhythm. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, her answers clipped and emotionless. She moved silently through the house, her presence so unobtrusive that it often startled the family when she suddenly appeared in a room. Despite Lila's efforts to involve her in family activities, Emily seemed to exist on the periphery, always watching but never participating. Then there were the accidents. Small things at first. A shattered picture frame that had fallen from the wall, its glass shards scattered across the living room floor. Lila's favorite necklace, a gift from Marcus, vanishing from her nightstand only to be found buried in the backyard weeks later. Maya's school project, painstakingly constructed over days, mysteriously torn to pieces while she was out of the room. Each incident was brushed off as coincidence or carelessness, but the frequency of these events grew until it became impossible to ignore. The family dynamic began to shift in subtle, insidious ways. Marcus and Lila, once a united front, found themselves snapping at each other over small disagreements. The twins, who had always been close, started bickering constantly, their arguments escalating into full-blown shouting matches. Even Isaiah, usually cheerful and full of energy, grew withdrawn, spending hours alone in his room with the door locked. Emily, meanwhile, remained an enigma. She showed no interest in making friends at school and avoided the neighborhood kids who came by to play with Isaiah. Instead, she spent hours in the attic, a dusty, forgotten space that had once been used for storage. Lila had offered Emily a cozy room with a view of the desert, but Emily seemed drawn to the attic, claiming she liked the quiet. Marcus tried to set boundaries, insisting she spend more time with the family, but Emily would simply nod and retreat to her room, her expression blank. It was in the attic that Emily's true nature began to surface. She created a small nest of sorts, lining the floor with blankets and arranging objects she'd taken from around the house. A photograph of the Jones family, its glass frame cracked. One of Isaiah's toys, its head twisted off. Maya's favorite lipstick melted into an unrecognizable lump. In the center of the collection was a notebook filled with strange, chaotic drawing spirals, jagged lines, and crude stick figures with faces scratched out. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, the power suddenly went out. The house plunged into darkness and Isaiah began to cry. Marcus fetched a flashlight, his beam cutting through the shadows as he checked the breaker box. The power returned after a few tense minutes, but when the lights flickered back on, Emily was gone from the table. Lila found her sitting in the attic, her hands clasped tightly around a shard of broken mirror. She didn't explain how she'd gotten it, nor did she answer when Lila asked if she was hurt. The incidents grew darker. Isaiah claimed someone was whispering his name at night, a voice so soft it was barely audible. Maya found her clothes shredded in her closet, each garment slashed with precision. Malik's prize skateboard was found splintered in the backyard, though no one heard it break. Lila began waking up in the middle of the night with an inexplicable sense of dread, her skin crawling as if someone were watching her. Marcus tried to dismiss it all as paranoia, blaming the stress of taking in a troubled teen. But even he couldn't ignore the oppressive atmosphere that had taken hold of their home. He started sleeping with a baseball bat under his bed, his instincts as a Navy officer whispering that something was deeply wrong. Through it all, Emily remained quiet, her behavior unnervingly consistent. She helped with chores when asked, kept her room spotless, and answered every question with polite indifference. But her presence began to feel like a weight pressing on the family, her silence amplifying the tension until it was nearly unbearable. No one noticed how often Emily watched them from the shadows, her dark eyes following their every move. No one saw the way her lips twitched into a faint smile when Marcus and Lila argued, or when Isaiah ran to his room in tears. She had woven herself into their lives like a thread of poison, pulling tighter with each passing day. The Jones family had taken Emily in out of kindness, hoping to give her a chance at a better life. They didn't realize they had invited something much darker into their home, something that thrived on their love and turned it into fear. By the time they saw Emily for what she truly was, it would already be too late. Before Emily became a shadow in the Jones family home, she had lived a life defined by cruelty, neglect, and a steady descent into darkness. She was born in a small, decaying town in rural Oregon, the product of a fleeting relationship between a teenage mother and a father she never met. Her mother, Caroline, was ill-equipped to care for a child, her days spent chasing the next high, and her nights filled with strangers who drifted in and out of their crumbling apartment. Emily's cries as an infant were ignored, her needs met only when Caroline could be bothered. From an early age, Emily learned the art of invisibility. When her mother was sober, she could be cruel, snapping at Emily for the smallest mistakes or locking her in a closet for hours as punishment. When Caroline wasn't sober, her anger turned into something else, a volatile unpredictability that kept Emily on edge. She discovered that silence was her best defense, that making herself small and unnoticeable reduced the chances of drawing her mother's wrath. But this survival tactic came at a cost. It stripped her of the ability to trust, to form attachments, or to believe in the kindness of others. By the time she was 6, Emily had learned that the world was not a safe place. One night, after a particularly violent outburst from her mother, Emily crawled out of the window and wandered the streets barefoot, her thin nightgown offering little protection against the cold. She was found hours later by a police officer, her small frame huddled beneath a bridge. She didn't cry or speak, even as she was placed into the back of the patrol car. Emily's entry into the foster system marked the beginning of her descent into something darker. Her first foster family seemed kind at first, an older couple who had taken in other children before. But kindness turned to indifference when they realized Emily wasn't like the others. She didn't smile or play. She sat in corners with her knees pulled to her chest, her gaze fixed on the floor. When other children tried to befriend her, she stared at them until they grew uncomfortable and walked away. The foster parents tried to coax her out of her shell, but their patience wore thin, and she was soon sent back to the group home. Over the years, Emily bounced from one foster home to another. Each time she arrived with fewer belongings and an even deeper silence. Foster parents described her as troubled and difficult, citing incidents that began small but escalated with each new placement. In one home, Emily was caught pulling the legs off her foster brother's pet hamster. In another, she carved strange symbols into the walls of her bedroom, deep gouges that couldn't be painted over. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words carried a weight that unsettled those who heard them. The turning point came when Emily was placed with the DeVries family, a couple with 2 biological children and a large property on the outskirts of a quiet town. At first, everything seemed fine. Emily kept to herself, spending hours wandering the fields and woods behind the house. But within months, the DeVries lives began to unravel. Their youngest child, a 5-year-old boy named Noah, fell gravely ill. Doctors were unable to determine the cause, but he grew weaker with each passing day. Emily spent hours sitting by his bedside, her gaze fixed on his pale face, her hand gently stroking his hair. One night, Noah's condition took a sudden and fatal turn. He was found in his bed, his small body still and cold, his lips tinged with blue. The family was devastated, but they never suspected Emily. The coroner ruled the death as natural causes, but whispers began to spread. Neighbors spoke of strange lights coming from Emily's bedroom window late at night, of animals found dead on the property, their bodies arranged in grotesque patterns. The DeVries eventually asked the foster agency to remove Emily, claiming they could no longer care for her. She returned to the group home, but her reputation followed her. Other children avoided her, whispering rumors of her involvement in Noah's death. Emily, now 10 years old, began to show the first signs of calculated malice. She would wait until the house was silent before sneaking into the bedrooms of other children, leaving disturbing objects on their pillows: dead insects, tufts of fur, or small, crudely carved wooden dolls with missing limbs. As Emily grew older, her acts of cruelty became more sophisticated. She learned how to manipulate the adults around her, feigning innocence while subtly pitting foster siblings against one another. She planted stolen items in their rooms, whispered lies that sowed distrust, and watched with quiet satisfaction as families crumbled under the weight of her schemes. By the time she turned 13, her foster file was filled with red flags, but no one could ever prove she was directly responsible for the chaos she left in her wake. The group home where Emily spent most of her adolescence was understaffed and overcrowded, a breeding ground for neglect and abuse. Emily thrived in the environment, learning to exploit its weaknesses. She befriended one of the younger girls, a 7-year-old named Bethany, gaining her trust with small acts of kindness. Over time, Emily began to test the boundaries of their friendship, daring Bethany to break rules or steal from the staff. The final test came when Emily coaxed Bethany into climbing onto the roof of the group home. Bethany fell. She survived, but with a shattered leg that never healed properly. When questioned, Emily claimed she had tried to stop her, that she had been too late to save her friend. The staff believed her, praising her for her heroic attempt, but the other children knew the truth. They saw the way Emily watched Bethany afterward, her dark eyes glinting with something close to amusement. By the time Emily was 16, her file was a patchwork of failed placements, unexplained incidents, and warnings from previous foster parents. She had become an expert at masking her true nature, presenting herself as a quiet, misunderstood teenager who just needed a chance. When Lila Jones visited the group home and spoke to Emily for the first time, she saw only a fragile girl who had been let down by the system. She didn't see the carefully constructed mask, the predator lurking beneath the surface. Emily's past wasn't just one of survival, it was a training ground for manipulation and destruction. Every home that took her in became a stage for her experiments in control, her growing fascination with breaking the bonds of trust and love that others took for granted. The Jones family was just another opportunity, another experiment. But this time Emily didn't plan to leave survivors. The desert air was oppressively still on the night Isaiah died. The house, usually alive with the sounds of laughter and conversation, had grown eerily quiet in the weeks since Emily's arrival. The tension within the Jones family simmered just below the surface, like a storm waiting to break. It was into this silence that Emily wove her darkest work, her intentions cloaked in a mask of obedience and innocence. Isaiah had always been a bright, curious child, the youngest and most vulnerable member of the Jones family. His boundless energy was a constant source of joy for his parents, though it sometimes annoyed his older siblings. He had tried to befriend Emily when she first arrived, bringing her toys to play with and chattering to her about his favorite superheroes. Emily never showed irritation, but she didn't return his enthusiasm either. She simply watched him with a detached curiosity, her dark eyes following his every move like a predator studying its prey. Over time, Emily began to isolate Isaiah from the rest of the family. It started with small, seemingly innocuous gestures suggesting games that involved only the two of them, teaching him how to keep secrets. She whispered to him at night, planting seeds of fear in his young mind. She told him there were things in the house that no one else could see, things that only she could protect him from. Isaiah, too young to distinguish lies from reality, began to cling to her, believing she was his shield against unseen terrors. One night, Emily convinced Isaiah to come with her into the attic. She had turned the space into her sanctuary, a place where she could be alone with her thoughts and her growing collection of stolen trinkets. For Isaiah, the attic was a forbidden world, a dark and dusty place that his parents had warned him to avoid. But Emily's calm, soothing voice made him feel safe. She told him she had a secret to share, something special just for him. The attic was suffocatingly hot, the air thick with the smell of old wood and forgotten belongings. Emily led Isaiah to the far corner, where she had arranged her makeshift shrine. The objects she had collected from around the house were laid out with ritualistic precision: a torn page from one of Maya's notebooks, a small piece of metal from Malik's toolbox, and one of Lila's earrings, bent into an unrecognizable shape. In the center of it all was a doll she had fashioned from scraps of cloth and string, its button eyes sewn on crookedly, its mouth a jagged slash of red thread. Isaiah stared at the doll, his small hands clutching the hem of his pajama shirt. He asked Emily what it was, his voice trembling with a mix of curiosity and fear. She told him it was a talisman, something to protect them from the things that lived in the shadows. But it needed a sacrifice, she explained, a token of his trust. Isaiah didn't understand what she meant, but Emily's steady, unblinking gaze held him captive. She handed him a knife, its blade dull but sharp enough to draw blood. She told him to prick his finger, just enough to let a single drop fall onto the doll. Isaiah hesitated, his young mind struggling to reconcile the gentle tone of her voice with the sharp glint of the blade. But Emily's words were hypnotic, weaving a spell of reassurance that lulled him into obedience. His small hands trembled as he pressed the blade to his skin, a bead of red welling up on his fingertip. Emily took the knife from him and placed the bloody doll in the center of her shrine. She told Isaiah he had done well, that he was safe now. But as she spoke, her voice changed, growing softer and more chilling. She told him there was one more thing he needed to do to protect his family. He needed to trust her completely, to follow her instructions without question. What happened next was a blur of shadows and muffled sounds. Emily moved with a cold precision, her small frame belying the strength of her intentions. She looped an old piece of rope around Isaiah's neck, tightening it with a practiced motion that belied her age. Isaiah's cries were weak, choked off by the noose as he struggled to understand what was happening. His small hands clawed at the rope, his wide, terrified eyes locking onto Emily's face. She didn't look away. She wanted him to see her, to understand who was ending his life. The struggle didn't last long. Isaiah's body went limp, his small frame collapsing onto the dusty floor of the attic. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Emily's steady breathing. She knelt beside him, tilting her head as she studied his lifeless form. Her expression was calm, almost clinical, as if she were observing the outcome of an experiment. Emily worked quickly to stage the scene. She unwrapped the rope from Isaiah's neck and arranged his body near the edge of the attic's access ladder. She scattered a few toys around him, creating the illusion that he had climbed up to retrieve something and accidentally fallen. The knot of the rope was tied loosely around a rafter, just tight enough to suggest a tragic accident. Satisfied with her work, Emily descended the ladder, closing the hatch behind her. When the family discovered Isaiah's body the next morning, their screams shattered the fragile quiet of the house. Lila was inconsolable, cradling her youngest son in her arms as Marcus called 911. Maya and Malik stood frozen in the hallway, their faces pale with shock and disbelief. Emily stood apart from them, her expression carefully blank. She watched as the paramedics arrived, as the police asked questions, as the coroner's van drove away with Isaiah's small body inside. The death was ruled an accident, just as Emily had intended. The Jones family, already strained by the tension Emily had sown, began to fracture under the weight of their grief. Marcus buried himself in work, unable to face the emptiness of the house. Lila became a shell of herself, her vibrant energy drained away. Maya and Malik withdrew into their own worlds, their sibling bond frayed by the shared trauma. And Emily remained, silent and unassuming, a shadow in their midst. Isaiah's death was only the beginning, the first step in a plan that was unfolding with meticulous care. She had tested the boundaries of her control, and now she knew just how far she could push. The family's grief had opened cracks in their unity, and Emily intended to widen them until the Jones household crumbled entirely. The Jones household was no longer a home, it had become a suffocating prison of grief and suspicion. Isaiah's death hung over the family like a toxic cloud, poisoning every interaction. The laughter that once echoed through the halls was gone, replaced by heavy silences and muffled sobs. Each member of the family retreated into their own corners, their shared pain driving them further apart rather than uniting them. And at the heart of it all, Emily watched, her calm exterior concealing the dark satisfaction that churned beneath. Lila, once the pillar of strength for her family, was unraveling. She had always prided herself on her ability to fix things, to hold everyone together even in the face of adversity. But Isaiah's death had broken something inside her. She couldn't stop replaying the moment she found his small, lifeless body in the attic, his face pale and still. Her guilt consumed her. If she hadn't let Emily into their home, if she had been more vigilant, Isaiah might still be alive. Lila tried to keep busy, throwing herself into household chores and long shifts at the hospital, but her exhaustion only deepened her despair. She started forgetting small things, appointments, phone calls, even meals, her mind fogged by grief. Marcus buried himself in work, spending long hours at the garage and returning home well past midnight. He couldn't bear to face the emptiness of the house, the constant reminders of what they had lost. His tools became his escape, the rhythmic clinking of metal on metal drowning out the memories. But his absence only widened the rift between him and Lila. Their conversations, once warm and easy, turned sharp and clipped. They argued over everything: how to discipline the twins, how to deal with Emily, even what to eat for dinner. The tension between them simmered just beneath the surface, ready to boil over at any moment. The twins, Malik and Maya, were no better off. Their bond, once unbreakable, had been fractured by the weight of their shared trauma. Malik had always been protective of Maya, but now he avoided her, retreating into his garage workspace to tinker with his bike or listen to music on his headphones. Maya, in turn, spent hours locked in her room, scrolling through social media or staring at the ceiling, her mind filled with thoughts she couldn't put into words. They fought often, their arguments escalating into shouting matches that echoed through the house. Emily remained a quiet, unsettling presence in the midst of the chaos. She moved through the house like a shadow, her soft footsteps almost imperceptible. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, her answers polite but devoid of emotion. She offered to help with chores, setting the table or folding laundry, but her efforts only seemed to deepen the unease. Her silence was oppressive, a constant reminder of the questions no one dared to ask. But Emily's influence was far from passive. She worked subtly, manipulating the family's fragile state to her advantage. She planted small seeds of doubt, whispering to Lila that Marcus seemed distant, that he might be hiding something. She told Marcus that Lila had been taking pills to help her sleep, exaggerating her forgetfulness to suggest she was losing control. She left items in Malik's workspace: Maya's hair tie, one of her notebooks, fostering resentment and suspicion between the twins. The strange occurrences that had begun with Emily's arrival grew more frequent and unsettling. Lila started finding her belongings out of place: her wedding ring moved from the jewelry box to the bathroom sink, her keys left in the freezer. Marcus discovered deep scratches on the hood of his car, as if someone had dragged a blade across the metal. Maya's favorite sweater disappeared, only to reappear days later, torn and reeking of smoke. The family dismissed these incidents as accidents or pranks, but the cumulative effect was undeniable. The house no longer felt safe. One night, Maya woke to the sound of whispers. At first, she thought it was a dream, the muffled voices blending with the faint hum of the air conditioner. But as she lay there, her heart pounding, the whispers grew clearer. They seemed to come from the hallway outside her room, a low, insistent murmur that sent chills down her spine. Gathering her courage, she opened the door and peered into the darkness. The hallway was empty, but the whispers continued, just out of reach. She slammed the door shut and spent the rest of the night curled under her blankets, her mind racing with fear. The next morning, Maya tried to tell Lila about the whispers, but her mother dismissed it as a nightmare, too preoccupied with her own spiraling thoughts to take Maya seriously. Malik, overhearing the conversation, accused Maya of making things up for attention. The argument that followed was vicious, their voices rising until Lila snapped, yelling at both of them to stop. Emily stood in the corner, watching the scene unfold with an expression of mild curiosity, as though she were observing an experiment. Marcus began drinking more heavily, nursing a bottle of whiskey in the garage after work. One night he stumbled into the house, his face flushed and his speech slurred. He accused Lila of being too controlling, of smothering the family with her grief. Lila fired back, accusing him of abandoning them when they needed him most. Their argument turned explosive, the raw pain of Isaiah's death spilling out in angry, hurtful words. Malik and Maya listened from their rooms, the sound of their parents shouting making them feel smaller and more powerless than ever. The walls of the Jones home seemed to close in tighter with each passing day. The once bright living room, with its cheerful yellow curtains and family portraits, now felt dim and oppressive. The kitchen, where Lila used to bake cookies with Isaiah, remained eerily spotless, as though no one dared to disturb it. Even the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed weaker, its warmth unable to penetrate the cold tension that gripped the house. Emily thrived in the chaos. She carefully stoked the flames of discord, her actions calculated to deepen the fractures in the family's relationships. She left notes where she knew they would be found, scraps of paper with cryptic messages like "he's lying to you" or "she knows your secret." She moved objects just enough to be noticed, creating an atmosphere of paranoia and unease. And through it all, she maintained her mask of innocence, her dark eyes wide and guileless. As the weeks dragged on, the Jones family reached their breaking point. Lila stopped speaking to Marcus altogether, retreating into her bedroom and leaving him to his whiskey. Malik and Maya barely acknowledged each other, their once playful sibling rivalry now a festering wound. And Emily, the catalyst for it all, remained a silent witness to their unraveling, her presence a constant reminder of the tragedy that had brought them to this point. The house, once a place of love and laughter, had become a crucible of fear and mistrust. And Emily, the architect of their misery, was far from finished. She had tested their bonds and found them weak, and now she was ready to strike again, to push the family past the point of no return. The shadows in the Jones home grew darker with each passing day, and Emily was content to wait, knowing the end was near. The Jones house was quiet, the kind of silence that presses heavy against the chest and makes every creak of the floorboards seem deafening. It was a stillness born not of peace but of tension, the air thick with the weight of too many unsaid words and unresolved fears. Emily had worked her poison well, and the family, already fractured by Isaiah's death, was now teetering on the brink of collapse. Every room seemed colder, every shadow darker, as though the house itself had absorbed the pain and despair that lingered within its walls. Emily watched from the edges of the chaos she had created, her expression calm but her mind alive with dark purpose. She had sown distrust, fear, and anger into the hearts of each family member, and now she stood ready to reap the harvest. The Jones family had taken her in, offered her kindness and love, but she had no use for these things. To Emily, they were weaknesses to be exploited, tools to bend the family to her will before extinguishing them completely. The night began like so many others, Marcus drinking in the garage, Lila retreating to her bedroom with a bottle of sleep aids, Maya locked in her room with her headphones on, and Malik tinkering with his tools in the corner of the basement. Emily moved through the house like a ghost, her bare feet silent against the floors. She stopped outside each door, listening, making note of every sound. Her plan was already in motion, set in place with meticulous care. It began with Malik. She had left a message for him earlier that day, scrawled in thick, black marker across the wall of his workspace. "She's lying to you." The ambiguity was intentional, a seed of doubt planted in his already troubled mind. When Malik found the message, his first thought was of Maya, the sibling he had grown distant from in the weeks since Isaiah's death. He stared at the words for hours, his anger festering, his thoughts circling back to every argument, every perceived slight. Next was Maya. For her, Emily had left a different kind of message. On her pillow was one of Malik's tools, a wrench coated in a fine layer of grease. It didn't belong there, and Maya, already on edge, immediately saw it as a warning. The wedge between the twins, driven deep by weeks of mistrust, was now hammered further apart. Maya's heart raced as she clutched the wrench in her trembling hands, her mind spinning with paranoia. Emily's final touch was for Marcus and Lila. She waited until the house was cloaked in darkness, the only light coming from the dim glow of the garage and the soft flicker of Lila's bedside lamp. Emily crept into the kitchen and turned on the stove, letting the gas hiss into the air. She knew Marcus would smell it eventually. His time in the Navy had made him hyper-aware of such dangers. When he did, he would storm into the house, his already volatile temper stoked by alcohol and the suffocating weight of his grief. When the confrontation began, Emily stood in the shadows watching. Marcus burst into the house, shouting about the gas, his voice slurred but loud enough to wake Lila. She stumbled out of her bedroom, her expression groggy and confused, only to be met with Marcus's fury. He accused her of carelessness, of putting their lives at risk. Lila, already worn thin by weeks of guilt and sleepless nights, snapped back, her voice breaking as she lashed out. The shouting woke the twins. Malik emerged from the basement, his fists clenched while Maya hovered at the top of the stairs, the wrench still in her hand. The tension in the house ignited like a spark to dry tinder, each family member's unresolved anger and pain erupting in a storm of accusations and recriminations. Emily chose this moment to act. She slipped upstairs, her movements deliberate and precise. She entered Maya's room and grabbed a pair of scissors from the desk, careful to leave the door slightly ajar. She placed the scissors on the floor outside Malik's room, the blade glinting faintly in the dim light. Then she screamed. The sound pierced the air, cutting through the shouting like a knife. It was a raw, chilling scream, filled with fear and desperation. The family froze, their arguments forgotten as they turned toward the sound. Emily appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. She pointed toward Malik's room, her voice shaking as she told them what she had seen Malik standing over Maya's bed with the scissors in his hand, his face twisted with anger. The accusation hit like a bomb. Marcus turned on Malik, his fury boiling over as he demanded to know what he had done. Malik, caught off guard and already primed for a fight, shouted back, denying everything but growing angrier with every word. Maya, still clutching the wrench, hesitated for only a moment before accusing Malik of leaving it on her pillow, claiming it was a threat. The argument spiraled out of control, each family member shouting over the other, their voices rising to a fever pitch. Emily slipped away again, retreating to the kitchen where she retrieved a long, serrated knife from the drawer. Her hands were steady as she gripped the handle, the weight of the blade familiar and comforting. She moved through the chaos unnoticed, her small frame blending into the shadows. The first strike was fast, precise. She plunged the knife into Marcus's back as he turned to shout at Lila, the force of the blow driving him to his knees. He gasped, his hands clawing at the air as he tried to turn around, but Emily was already moving. She turned to Lila, who stood frozen in shock, and slashed the blade across her throat. Lila's hands flew to her neck, her eyes wide with disbelief as she crumpled to the floor. Maya screamed, the sound high and broken, as Emily advanced on her. Malik, stunned by the sudden violence, stumbled backward, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. But Emily didn't hesitate. She drove the knife into Maya's stomach, twisting the blade as Maya's body went limp. Malik was the last. He raised his hands in a futile attempt to defend himself, but Emily was faster. She lunged at him, her movements relentless and precise. The knife found its mark, and Malik fell, his body hitting the floor with a dull thud. The house fell silent once more, the air heavy with the scent of blood and gas. Emily stood in the center of the carnage, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. She surveyed her work with a calm, detached expression, her dark eyes taking in the still forms of the family that had taken her in, loved her, and trusted her. She wiped the knife on her shirt and placed it on the kitchen counter. Then she walked to the phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling as she told the operator that someone had broken into the house, that her family was gone, that she was the only one left. When the authorities arrived, Emily was sitting on the front porch, her face streaked with tears, her small frame trembling in the cold desert air. She told them her story, a terrifying tale of an intruder, a struggle, and her miraculous survival. They believed her, of course. After all, who would suspect a 16-year-old girl of such horrific acts? As the paramedics wheeled the bodies out of the house and the police took her statement, Emily allowed herself a small smile. The Jones family was gone, and she had played her role perfectly. The game was over, for now. But deep inside, Emily knew it was only the beginning. The Jones house became a crime scene, its warm, lived-in atmosphere replaced by cold precision and the harsh glare of forensic lights. Yellow police tape stretched across the doorway, flapping weakly in the desert breeze. Officers moved in and out of the house, their voices low, their faces grim. The once bright living room was now a tableau of horror. Dark, congealed pools of blood marred the carpet. Furniture lay overturned, and the faint metallic tang of violence clung to the air. Emily sat on the front porch, wrapped in a scratchy blanket provided by a paramedic. She looked small and frail, her face pale and streaked with tears that glistened under the floodlights. Her dark eyes darted around the scene, wide and trembling, as if she couldn't bear to look too long at any one thing. When questioned by the police, her voice wavered with just the right amount of fear and sorrow. She described a masked intruder, their shadowy figure moving through the house with deadly intent. She spoke of how she had hidden in the pantry, paralyzed with terror, until the silence told her it was safe to emerge. Her story was flawless. The officers bought it without hesitation. Emily's small stature and tear-soaked cheeks made her seem like the perfect victim. Detectives murmured their condolences, their eyes softening as they looked at her. Even the coroner paused, her gloved hands resting on the stretcher that carried Lila's body, to offer Emily a look of sympathy. They called her a survivor, marveling at how she had lived through such unspeakable violence. The media descended on the story within hours. By morning, the murder of the Jones family was plastered across every news channel and social media feed. Headlines screamed variations of the same chilling narrative: home invasion, horror, family slaughtered in their Nevada home, teen survivor speaks out. Reporters swarmed the crime scene, their cameras capturing the exterior of the house, the discarded stretchers, the bloodied footprints left by first responders. Neighbors offered tearful interviews, describing the Jones family as loving, kind, and generous. No one had anything to say about Emily. She had slipped under their radar, unnoticed except as that quiet girl the Joneses adopted. In the days that followed, Emily's fabricated story grew legs, fueled by the media's relentless hunger for drama. She told the reporters what they wanted to hear, her voice shaky as she described hiding in the pantry and hearing her family's screams. She crafted her words carefully, sprinkling in enough detail to make the story believable but leaving enough ambiguity to avoid being tripped up later. She played the grieving orphan perfectly, her eyes filling with tears at all the right moments, her small hands twisting in her lap as though she were trying to hold herself together. The town mourned the Jones family with a collective sorrow that bordered on hysteria. Candlelight vigils were held outside the house, the soft glow of hundreds of flames creating a stark contrast against the yellow crime scene tape. People left flowers, photos, and handwritten notes at the edge of the property, their messages filled with heartbreak and confusion. Children Isaiah's age drew pictures of him as an angel, his stick figure wings spread wide. Emily attended every vigil, standing among the mourners with her head bowed, her expression a mask of quiet grief. People embraced her, their words of comfort spilling over her like a baptism. "You're so brave," they told her. "You're so strong." Emily accepted their sympathy with the solemnity of a saint, her dark eyes downcast but glinting with satisfaction. The police investigation, though thorough, failed to uncover any evidence of Emily's involvement. The knife she had used to kill her family had been carefully wiped clean of fingerprints and left on the counter, where it appeared the fictional intruder had discarded it in haste. The message scrawled on Malik's wall was dismissed as a coincidence, a manifestation of the intruder's twisted mind. The gas stove incident, with its subtle suggestion of premeditation, was chalked up to negligence in the chaos of the attack. Emily's version of events became the official story, a home invasion gone horribly wrong, a tragic tale of a family torn apart by senseless violence. The detectives assigned to the case struggled to piece together a motive for the supposed intruder but ultimately concluded it had been a robbery gone awry. They closed the case after weeks of dead ends, leaving the town to mourn and Emily to move on. But Emily didn't mourn. She was sent to live with a new foster family in another part of the state, the sympathetic public eager to see her placed in a safe, loving environment. The Wilsons were a middle-aged couple who had no children of their own. They welcomed Emily into their home with open arms, their voices soft and kind as they reassured her that she was safe now. Emily played the part of the damaged survivor perfectly, her quiet demeanor and haunted eyes endearing her to her new foster parents. She thanked them often, her voice trembling with gratitude, but in the privacy of her new bedroom, her expression was serene. The Wilsons' house was immaculate, filled with soft pastel tones and the faint scent of lavender. Emily explored it with the curiosity of a child, her fingers grazing the polished surfaces and expensive furniture. In the attic, she found a collection of old photo albums and heirlooms, relics of the Wilsons' family history. She spent hours up there flipping through the pages, her mind already beginning to map out the intricacies of her new game. Emily knew the pattern well by now. First, she would learn their weaknesses, listening carefully to every word they spoke, watching for the small cracks in their smiles. Then, she would test them, planting subtle doubts and fears, watching how they responded. She would wait until they trusted her completely, until they left their doors unlocked and their secrets unguarded. And then she would strike, as she always did, precise and unflinching. In the meantime, Emily basked in the adoration of the public. Letters poured in from strangers offering their support, their words filled with pity and admiration. Some sent gifts, stuffed animals, handmade quilts, even money. Emily read every letter carefully, her lips curving into a faint smile as she absorbed their praise. To them, she was a victim, a symbol of resilience in the face of unimaginable tragedy. But Emily knew the truth. She wasn't a victim. She was a predator, and the Wilsons were her next prey. In the dead of night, while the house lay still and silent, Emily sat on the floor of her bedroom, her hands carefully stitching together a new doll. This one was different from the one she had made in the Joneses' attic, more intricate, its button eyes perfectly aligned, its red thread mouth sewn into a crooked grin. She whispered to it as she worked, her voice soft and melodic, as though she were telling it a secret. When she finished, she placed the doll on the windowsill, its small fabric body slumped against the glass. Beyond the window, the desert stretched out endlessly, its dark expanse mirroring the void inside her. Emily smiled, her eyes glinting with something sharp and cruel. The Jones family was gone, their house silent and empty, their story reduced to a cautionary tale. But Emily's work was far from over. The game had simply moved to a new board, the pieces arranged just so. And as she stared out into the endless night, Emily's mind was already planning her next move.